Banking giant Morgan Stanley has agreed to pay $10 million after regulators discovered that the bank wasn't complying with anti-money laundering regulations. You know, here again, how many times have we done this story on HSBC? Let me lay it out real quick. They've heard it before. I think this is such a critical story. Bankers now have figured out that laundering money is very profitable. Who are they laundering it for? We found HSBC and a half a dozen other banks that were laundering money for drug cartels. They knew that, Mexican drug cartels. We found banks that were laundering money for terrorist cells all over the world. They knew they were laundering money. They knew it was causing, Americans' deaths, soldiers' deaths. They knew that. As a matter of fact, here's what really bothers me about this story. Maybe you can help me on this. You know who the people were behind the deal that was worked out with HSBC? I mean, this sweetheart deal where they paid $1.9 billion on HSBC. Nobody went to prison. They signed a document that admitted to criminal conduct. 12 elements of criminal conduct that anybody else would be in prison today for. You know who cut the deal? Mueller, Loretta Lynch, and Comey. I want you to think about that. You always hear about this inside game that exists in Washington. Who are these people that move from board of directors here to board of directors there? They move out of justice and move to this board of directors case story. So all of a sudden, we're now looking at this and we find out that the people who actually negotiated this, made it happen, was Mueller, who now is investigating Trump and I guess everybody else in the country. This is the guy that cut the sweetheart deal with HSBC.
Right.
So give me your take on how are we affected when we say to Morgan Stanley, gee, guys, we know you're laundering money, pay $10 million and go your way. What's your reaction to that?
Right. They had, after the big banking collapse, these new rules were put in place that said this is what banks are legally required to do to make sure you're not laundering money for terrorist or drug cartels. And for 6 years, Morgan Stanley just wasn't doing it. And they had tens of billions of dollars coming through their bank that they knew this was probably dirty money. They can't say for sure that it was or wasn't, but they knew that it probably was. And so now they say, okay, well, you've made billions off this.
Right.
So we're gonna have to fine you 10 million with an M, not billion with a B, after they made billions in profits from not complying.
Here's what I think is even more important. Morgan Stanley knew that HSBC and a half a dozen other banks had been caught.
Right.
Dirty, filthy hands where they're caught laundering money for terrorists. They're caught laundering money for drug cartels in Mexico. They get away with it because Mueller, Loretta Lynch, and Comey say, well, gee, we can work out a deal here, can't we? You pay $1.9 billion. Nobody gets prosecuted. Not one soul was prosecuted in that case, even though HSBC had to sign off on a document. There were 10 elements, all admitting, yes, we engaged in criminal conduct. Yes, we knew that what we were doing was wrong. Yes, we knew that because of what we were doing, Americans were being killed. That's how serious this is. Now, Morgan Stanley says, well, God, I guess, since nobody was prosecuted, I guess we can get away with it. Unless you throw these cats in prison, culture doesn't change.
Right.
HSBC takes place. We know they're criminals. They committed criminal conduct. Morgan Stanley looks at that. They say, oh, all they had to do was pay $1.9 billion. And, oh, by the way, they made $20 billion. So why don't we do the same thing?
It's a great investment.
It's a really good investment if you think about it. Farron Cousins, thanks for joining me. These stories every week get stranger and stranger. Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted clemency to Centoya Brown, a woman serving life in prison for killing a man who paid her to have sex when she was 16 years old. Activists put Brown's case in the media spotlight, saying the teen was being exploited for sex at the time that the murder took place, and many celebrities have picked up this cause. This is a grab bag here. I've got Molly Barrows to talk about this. You followed, interesting thing about your career as an anchor in the news.
Yes.
Is you have followed many stories like this.
Yes.
Most of the time they centered around police officers and that type of abuse. But as I'm looking at this case and you look at the stories surrounding it, you got really a big divergence. You're saying, no, yeah, she was 16, but she didn't have to murder the guy. It wasn't like there was no need for the murder.
Right.
So the other side of it is, well, she was 16 and she was being exploited. Give me your take on this.
Well, it's interesting. I think there has been a lot of support for this governor's decision. Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam decided earlier this month that she deserved clemency, and so she'll get out August 7th. She's already served 15 years. She was sentenced to life in prison for shooting this man to death, 43-year-old. Let's see, he was Johnny Allen, a Nashville real estate agent. He paid her pimp to have sex with her, picked her up at a fast food parking lot, took her back to his house. She shot him, killed him, robbed him, took his gun, as well as his wallet. And in fact, the officer on the case who investigated it felt like she didn't deserve clemency. But I think in light of the Me Too movement, when you have so many people saying young women are being exploited, this case deserves another look at it. Not only was she sentenced to life in prison as a juvenile, which has Supreme Court ramifications now, but she also was being exploited for sex. She wouldn't have been in that position to begin with. She was already the victim of a crime. So for her to commit this other crime, that's what advocates are saying.
But if you follow, now, as you know, I handle sex trafficking cases all over the country. I mean, we are probably one firm that is committed to handling sex trafficking cases.
Yes.
But in a sex trafficking case, the people we're going after are the people who are responsible for the trafficking. In this situation, if she's going to kill somebody, kill the pimp.
Right.
You know, so I mean, if you follow the rationale,
right.
Well, she was being exploited. She was being exploited by the John, no question about it. And he deserved, you know, I don't deserve being killed,
right.
But he deserves some element of punishment. The pimp is the person who put her there. And she had been with the pimp a couple of years.
Yes.
Been on the street a couple of years. I can see why the public is split on this.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the reaction, because she had a lot of celebrity support. I think it is one that is worthy of conversation, regardless of where you fall in the decision to grant her clemency. Because I think there are so many things that are wrong with this situation. She's certainly grateful to the governor. She thanked him for his decision and said, thank you for having the faith in me to make this decision. But, you know, it is a political one to a great extent. Tennessee is a red state. The Republican governor is, well, he's a Republican as well, but Nashville itself is blue. He had pressure from the city council there in Nashville, as well as the mayor, to make this decision. The parole board was even split. You have a 6-member board. 2 wanted her to say time served already at 15 years. 2 wanted her to not be eligible for parole for many more years. And 2 said she shouldn't be out at all.
Okay, something I see on this story that is interesting to me, because we've talked about it before. The term is celebrity cool. Okay, celebrity cool is somebody in Hollywood says, gee, this is terrible, let me get involved. A lot of times they don't really have all of the facts, but they feel like their opinion is so important that everybody simply is going to cower to that opinion. The way I see this story, if you take a look at the news articles on this, there is a huge split between the people who know what actually happened here and kind of the celebrity cool crowd who kind of parachutes in, gives their opinion, get a little publicity. It's really more about their publicity than it is the victim most of the time.
Right.
What is your I mean, it's a very strong split here in Nashville, isn't it?
It is, and I think it goes to people who supported the bigger cause, not necessarily her case in particular,
right.
But they supported the bigger cause of teenagers shouldn't be used and exploited in sex. And I think you see that, for example, you have this new legislator that just came on in Tennessee, London Lamar. One of her first acts as a new representative in Tennessee legislature was to introduce a bill that's based on Centoya Brown's case.
Well, that's a good idea. I mean, I handle sex trafficking cases.
Right.
The more legislation we have that helps us go after the bad guys, helps us go after the pimps, helps us go after the corporations,
right.
Major corporations involved in sex trafficking, hotels, casinos, truck industry.
All the enablers.
All the enablers.
In this case, though, they're basically saying in this law that would automatically protect the victim of the sex crime. Say you're being trafficked, it's saying that because you're already being used in prostitution, it almost excuses you, and that's not exactly the right word, but the way the word of the law is, it's presumed to be acting in self-defense if the person uses force intended to cause serious injury or death, if they're being used in prostitution.
The guy, I mean, let's take it down to the basics. The guy to kill here was the pimp. Molly, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pat.
This is an important message for our nation's veterans. If you served our country in the military between 2003 and 2015 and you suffered significant hearing loss, you might be entitled to compensation. because the hearing protection you were issued may be at fault for the damage you suffered, but you need to act now. Your time to make a claim might be limited. Learn more at levinlaw.com/earplugs.